Dr. Alex Parker had attended exactly 3 interstellar diplomatic summits in his career as a xenobotanist, and each one had reinforced his conviction that he was fundamentally unsuited for high-level political gatherings. The Valethra Diplomatic Summit on Moon Station Prism, however, was setting new records for making him feel like a dandelion at a rose competition, technically a flowering plant, but obviously not what anyone came to see. The reception hall stretched before him like a botanical garden designed by someone with unlimited resources and a deep appreciation for showing off. Living walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, while overhead, a canopy of interconnected vines created natural architecture that responded to the emotional states of the gathered dignitaries. Somewhere in the scientific part of his brain, Alex was fascinated by the integration of organic and technological systems. The rest of his brain was focused on not embarrassing himself in front of assembled representatives from 47 different species. "Dr. Parker," came a voice behind him, "I've been hoping to meet you." Alex turned to find Ambassador Torres from the Human Colonial Diplomatic Corps, a woman whose smile suggested she was about to ask him to do something he wouldn't enjoy. "Ambassador," Alex said, offering what he hoped was an appropriately professional greeting. "I'm honored to be included in this summit, though I suspect my presentation on agricultural symbiosis might be somewhat niche for this audience." "On the contrary," Torres said, her smile taking on the quality that Alex had learned to associate with career-defining moments he hadn't asked for. "Your research has attracted considerable attention from several species, particularly the Valethra themselves." Alex glanced around the reception hall, noting the elegant figures whose skin seemed to shimmer with an internal light that reminded him of moonlight on water. The Valethra were renowned throughout the galaxy for their biotechnology and their harmonious relationship with living systems. Essentially, they were everything Alex aspired to be professionally, but with better genetics and the ability to make plants grow by thinking nice thoughts at them. "I'm flattered by their interest," Alex said, "though I imagine their biotechnology is several centuries ahead of anything I've developed." "Perhaps," Torres agreed. "But according to our diplomatic briefings, they're particularly interested in your ethical framework for biological manipulation. Your paper on protective symbiosis versus exploitative enhancement apparently caused quite a stir in their scientific community." Alex felt that familiar mixture of pride and terror that came with discovering his work had been noticed by people whose opinions could make or break his career. The ethical considerations are important when you're working with living systems. Too many researchers treat biological enhancement as a purely technical challenge without considering the rights of the organisms involved. That perspective, Torres said, is apparently what makes you valuable to them. Before Alex could ask what exactly that meant, the reception hall's ambient lighting shifted to indicate the beginning of formal presentations. Representatives from various species began moving toward designated areas where they would share research, negotiate trade agreements, and engage in the complex diplomatic dance that kept interstellar civilization functioning. Alex checked his presentation materials for the 3rd time, ensuring that his data crystals were properly formatted for Valethra biointerfaces. His research on creating symbiotic agricultural systems was solid work, but presenting it to an audience that included beings who could literally communicate with plants felt like explaining fire to dragons. "Dr. Parker," came another voice, this one carrying an accent he didn't recognize but somehow sounded like music played on instruments made of starlight. Alex turned and found himself face to face with a Valethra woman whose presence seemed to make the reception hall's living architecture respond with increased bioluminescence. She was tall, as most Valethra were, with the characteristic silver-blue skin that seemed to contain its own light source. Her hair moved as if underwater, shifting between shades of deep green and silver, and her eyes held the kind of intelligence that made Alex feel like she could see directly through his carefully constructed professional confidence to the researcher who still got excited about soil composition. "Your Highness," Ambassador Torres said quickly, offering a formal bow. "Dr. Parker, may I present Princess Kaelin Valethra, heir to the Valethra throne and their foremost expert in biological sciences." Alex managed what he hoped was an appropriate diplomatic greeting, though his brain had shifted into the kind of emergency mode usually reserved for equipment failures and budget meetings. Princess Kaelin wasn't just royalty, she was the Valethra royal whose research papers he'd been reading and citing for the past 3 years. She was essentially a scientific celebrity who happened to own a planet. "Dr. Parker," Princess Kaelin said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with the living walls around them. "I've been following your work with great interest. Your approach to symbiotic systems design shows remarkable innovation within ethical boundaries." "Thank you, Your Highness," Alex managed, trying to sound like someone who regularly conversed with alien royalty instead of someone whose most sophisticated social interaction usually involved explaining plant biology to undergraduate students. "Your own research on bioarchitectural systems has been incredibly influential in my field." "I appreciate that," Kaelin said, stepping closer with a fluid grace that made Alex suddenly aware of how awkward human movement probably looked to someone whose species had evolved in harmony with their environment. "But I'm more interested in discussing your potential than your past work." Alex felt the first stirring of unease. "My potential?" "Your presentation today focuses on agricultural applications," Kaelin continued, "but your research methodology could be applied to far more significant challenges." Before Alex could ask what kind of challenges she meant, the reception hall's announcement system chimed with the gentle tones that indicated scheduled presentations would begin shortly. Alex realized he needed to make his way to the designated presentation area, where he would either impress a gathering of interstellar scientists or embarrass himself in front of people whose opinions could influence the next century of human-alien cooperation. "Your Highness," he said, "I should prepare for my presentation." "Actually," Princess Kaelin said, moving to block his path with a deliberateness that seemed both casual and completely intentional, "there's something I need to discuss with you first." Alex found himself stopped in the middle of the reception hall, with Princess Kaelin standing directly in front of him while the ambient conversations of hundreds of diplomats, scientists, and nobles created a backdrop of sophisticated interstellar networking. Her eyes, which he now noticed shifted color like her hair, currently showing flecks of gold that suggested some complex emotion he couldn't interpret, locked onto his with an intensity that made the rest of the gathering fade into background noise. "Dr. Parker," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite the surrounding conversations, and Alex realized that other attendees were beginning to notice their interaction with the kind of interest that suggested diplomatic significance. "You're all I want, human." The words hung in the air like a declaration that had just changed the fundamental nature of his mission to the summit. Around them, conversations paused as nearby diplomats and scientists turned their attention to what appeared to be either a romantic confession or a political statement of unprecedented directness from the heir to one of the galaxy's most influential thrones. Alex froze, his brain cycling through potential responses with all the efficiency of a crashed computer system. Princess Kaelin's statement could mean anything from professional collaboration to personal interest to some kind of alien diplomatic protocol he'd never studied. But the intensity in her eyes and the sudden quiet that had spread through their immediate vicinity suggested that whatever she meant, it was going to change his life in ways he wasn't prepared for. "Your Highness," he said carefully, acutely aware that his response was being observed by representatives of multiple species and would probably end up in diplomatic reports that could influence interstellar relations for decades, "I'm not sure I understand." "You will," Princess Kaelin said, her eyes shifting to a silver that reminded Alex of starlight on water. "After we talk privately. There's something I need you to help me with, Dr. Parker. Something that could save both our species." Alex looked around the reception hall, at the gathered diplomats whose attention was now focused on him and the alien princess who had just declared him essential to some undefined mission, and realized that his simple academic presentation had just become the least important part of his presence at the summit. His life, he suspected, was about to become significantly more complicated. Princess Kaelin's private chambers aboard the moon station were a testament to Vailthra biotechnology and Alex's complete unpreparedness for conducting important conversations in rooms where the furniture was technically alive. The walls breathed softly, their bioluminescent patterns shifting in response to the occupants' emotional states, while seating areas grew from the floor with the organic efficiency that made Vailthra architecture look effortless and slightly unsettling to human sensibilities. "Please, sit," Kaelin said, gesturing toward a chair that obligingly formed itself into the perfect ergonomic configuration for Alex's human physiology. "And forgive the dramatic scene in the reception hall. Sometimes direct statements are necessary to cut through diplomatic protocols. Alex settled into the living furniture, trying not to think about whether it was analyzing his vital signs or just being helpful. Your Highness, when you said I was all you want, the assembled diplomats seemed to think you were making some kind of personal declaration. In a way, I was, Kaelin said, settling into her own chair with the fluid grace that seemed to characterize everything about Vaelthra movement. Though perhaps not in the way most of them interpreted. Could you clarify what way you meant it? Alex asked, because confusion was becoming the dominant emotion in what was already shaping up to be the most surreal day of his academic career. Kaelin's hair shifted to deeper shades of green as she considered her words. Dr. Parker, Alex, how much do you know about the current political situation in our sector of the galaxy? The basics, Alex said carefully. The Vaelthra Council maintains peaceful relations with most species, humans included. There are some extremist factions who oppose interspecies cooperation, but they're generally considered marginal threats. Those marginal threats, Kaelin said, her eyes shifting to a troubled blue, have developed biological weapons specifically designed to target human and Vaelthra genetic markers. We have intelligence suggesting they plan to deploy these weapons within the next few months. Alex felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees, though that might have been his circulatory system responding to existential dread. Biological weapons? Against both our species? The extremist coalition views human Vaelthra cooperation as a threat to their vision of galactic hierarchy, Kaelin explained. They believe that if they can eliminate the two species most committed to peaceful coexistence, other civilizations will be forced to accept more aggressive approaches to interstellar relations. That's horrifying, Alex said, his scientific mind immediately jumping to the implications. But I'm a xenobotanist who studies agricultural symbiosis. I'm not sure how I fit into whatever response you're planning. Kaelin leaned forward, her expression carrying the intensity he'd seen in the reception hall. Your research on symbiotic systems isn't just about agriculture, Alex. The principles you've developed for creating protective relationships between different organisms could be applied to biological defense systems. You want to weaponize my plant research? Alex asked, feeling a spike of alarm that the room's bioluminescent walls immediately reflected back to him in shifting red patterns. I want to adapt your research to create biological shields, Kaelin corrected. Living systems that could detect and neutralize bioweapons before they can harm their intended targets. Your work on ethical symbiosis makes you uniquely qualified to develop defenses that protect without causing harm to other organisms. Alex stared at her, trying to process the concept of his agricultural research being transformed into planetary defense systems. That's theoretically possible, I suppose. But it would require extensive collaboration with Vaelthra biotechnology, access to your biological databases, and probably months of intensive research. Exactly, Kaelin said, her eyes shifting to gold with what Alex was beginning to recognize as hopeful determination. Which is why I need you to remain on Vaelthra Prime as my research partner. The work would have to be conducted in complete secrecy until we have functional prototypes. You're asking me to abandon my position at the university, move to an alien planet, and work on classified biological defense projects with the heir to the Vaelthra throne, Alex said slowly. Yes, Kaelin said simply. I'm asking you to help me save both our species from extinction. Alex looked around the living room, at the walls that responded to emotions and the furniture that adjusted itself to provide perfect comfort, and realized he was being offered the opportunity of several lifetimes wrapped in the kind of responsibility that could either make his career legendary or destroy it completely. Why me? He asked. The Vaelthra have biotechnology that's centuries ahead of human science. Why do you need a human research partner? Because, Kaelin said, rising from her chair and moving to a wall display that showed complex biological schematics, your research demonstrates something our science has struggled with, the ability to create symbiotic relationships that benefit all participants equally. She gestured to the display, which shifted to show Alex's published papers alongside Vaelthra research. Our biotechnology is advanced, but it tends toward hierarchical relationships, one organism directing others. Your approach focuses on mutual benefit and consent, even at the cellular level. Consent from plants? Alex asked, trying to follow her reasoning. Consent from living systems, Kalen corrected. The bioweapons we're facing are designed to exploit the hierarchical nature of most biotechnology. They turn advanced biological systems against themselves. But systems based on genuine symbiosis, on mutual benefit rather than control, would be naturally resistant to that kind of manipulation. Alex studied the schematics, his scientific curiosity warring with the magnitude of what she was proposing. The theoretical framework is sound, he admitted. But developing functional biological shields would require close collaboration, Kalen finished. Long hours working together to integrate human and Velthra approaches to biology. Extensive testing of systems that would need to respond to both our physiologies. There was something in her tone that suggested the collaboration she was describing would involve more than just scientific partnership, and Alex caught himself wondering if Princess Kalen's interest in his research was entirely professional. Your Highness, he said carefully, this project would require an enormous amount of trust between our species. Access to classified technology, sharing of biological data that could be used for weapons development if it fell into the wrong hands. Which is why, Kalen said, turning back to face him with an expression that seemed to combine royal authority with something more personal, I need someone whose ethical framework I trust completely. Someone whose research demonstrates commitment to protection rather than exploitation. And if the project fails? If we can't develop effective defenses in time? Kalen's eyes shifted to silver, and for a moment her royal composure cracked enough to reveal the weight of responsibility she was carrying. Then millions of people die, and the extremist factions reshape galactic civilization according to their vision of might making right. Alex looked at the biological schematics still displayed on the wall, at the elegant integration of human and Velthra research approaches, and realized that his response to this moment would define not just his career but potentially the future of interspecies cooperation. If I agree, he said slowly, what exactly would our working relationship involve? Intensive collaboration in my private research facilities, Kalen said. Synchronization of our biological rhythms to work effectively with symbiotic organisms. Close coordination of our research methodologies to create something neither of our species could develop alone. And the timeline for developing functional prototypes? We have perhaps 3 months before the extremists are ready to deploy their weapons, Kalen said grimly. 3 months to create biological defense systems that have never been attempted before. Alex stood up from his living chair, which seemed to sense his decision and began gradually returning to its neutral configuration. Princess Kalen, what you're describing is either the most important scientific collaboration in galactic history or a project that will get us both killed trying to achieve the impossible. Yes, she agreed, her eyes shifting to a warm amber that suggested both determination and something that looked remarkably like affection. Are you willing to find out which one it is? Alex looked at her face, at the intelligence and courage that had made her reach out to a human scientist she'd never met, and realized that his answer had been decided the moment she'd blocked his path in the reception hall. I'll need to contact my university and arrange an extended leave of absence, he said. And I'll want copies of all relevant research data before I commit to relocating to Velthra Prime. Of course, Kalen said, her relief evident in the brightening of the room's bioluminescent patterns. Alex, I want you to understand, what we're attempting will require complete trust and coordination between us. The biological systems we're developing will need to respond to both our genetic patterns. What exactly does that mean? Alex asked, though he suspected the answer would add yet another layer of complexity to what was already the most complicated decision of his life. It means, Kalen said, her eyes holding steady on that warm amber color, that we'll be biologically connected in ways that will make our partnership very intimate. Velthra Prime resembled what Alex imagined paradise might look like if it had been designed by biologists with unlimited resources and an aesthetic sense that favored living architecture over static construction. Princess Kalen's private research facility grew organically from the landscape like a crystalline forest, its walls breathing softly while internal passages adjusted their configurations based on the occupants' needs and emotional states. The synchronization process requires us to attune our biorhythms to the symbiotic organisms we're developing, Kalen explained as they stood before a chamber filled with what appeared to be liquid starlight contained within organic membranes. These proto-entities will eventually become the biological shields, but first they need to learn to recognize and protect both human and Veilthra genetic patterns. Alex studied the softly glowing organisms, his scientific mind cataloging their properties while trying not to think about the implications of biological synchronization with alien life forms. When you say synchronization, we'll need to allow the organisms to sample our genetic information, establish harmonic resonance with our neural patterns, and create symbiotic bonds that allow them to distinguish between threats and the life forms they're designed to protect, Kalen said matter-of-factly, as if she were describing a routine laboratory procedure rather than something that sounded like science fiction becoming uncomfortably personal reality. And this process involves extended physical contact while the organisms establish their recognition patterns, Kalen said, her skin shifting to a slightly silver hue that Alex had learned indicated complex emotions she was trying to hide. The symbiotic bonds form more effectively when the source organisms are in close proximity during the learning phase. Alex looked at the chamber full of proto-entities, then at Princess Kalen, whose scientific brilliance was matched only by her apparent ability to describe potentially intimate biological procedures with the same tone she might use to discuss soil composition. How close proximity are we talking about? Close enough for the organisms to monitor our combined bioelectric signatures, Kalen said, moving to the chamber's control interface. The process typically requires several hours of synchronized meditation while maintaining physical contact. Physical contact, Alex repeated, because apparently his vocabulary had been reduced to echoing her statements while his brain processed the fact that saving galactic civilization might require him to spend extended periods in intimate contact with an alien princess whose presence already made it difficult for him to think about anything other than the way her hair moved like underwater plants and her eyes shifted colors like a personal aurora. Over the past 2 weeks working together in her facility, Alex had discovered that Princess Kalen was not only brilliant but also surprisingly easy to collaborate with. She listened to his ideas without the condescension he'd expected from someone whose species had mastered biotechnology while humans were still figuring out basic agriculture. More problematically, she was also funny when she thought no one important was watching, genuinely curious about human culture, and possessed of a grace that made even routine laboratory work look like choreography. Alex, Kalen said, her voice gentler than her usual scientific precision, I know this process is unusual by human standards. If you're uncomfortable with the biological synchronization requirements. It's not that I'm uncomfortable, Alex said quickly, then realized that his response revealed more about his emotional state than was probably professionally appropriate. I mean, I understand the scientific necessity. It's just that we'll be sharing biological information at a level that most species consider extremely intimate, Kalen finished, her eyes shifting to a color Alex hadn't seen before, something between amber and rose that seemed to suggest vulnerability. Yes, Alex admitted. That. Kalen moved away from the chamber controls, approaching him with the fluid grace that characterized all her movements but somehow seemed more intentional now. Alex, there's something I haven't told you about why I specifically wanted you as my research partner. Something beyond my devastating expertise in agricultural symbiosis? Alex asked, attempting humor to deflect the intensity he was feeling about whatever revelation was coming. Your research papers weren't the first time I encountered your work, Kalen said, stopping close enough that Alex could see the subtle patterns of bioluminescence that played across her skin. 2 years ago, the Veilthra Science Council received a request from your university for collaboration on a project involving symbiotic crop development. Alex frowned, searching his memory. I don't remember any formal collaboration requests being submitted. Because the request was rejected by our council as too ambitious and potentially dangerous, Kalen continued. But I read your proposal. Your vision of creating biological systems based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation, it was unlike anything I'd encountered from human scientists. You've been following my work for 2 years? Alex asked, feeling something flutter in his chest that had nothing to do with scientific collaboration. I've been hoping for an opportunity to work with you for 2 years, Kaylin corrected, her skin shifting to deeper silver as she spoke. When the bioweapon threat emerged, and we needed someone who could develop protective rather than destructive biological systems. You saw a chance to work with someone whose research you admired, Alex finished. I saw a chance to work with someone whose approach to biology matched my own ethical framework, Kaylin said, then added more quietly, and someone whose dedication to protecting life rather than exploiting it suggested the kind of character I could trust with my people's survival. Alex looked at her face, noting the way her expression seemed to reflect not just immediate emotions but deeper currents of thought and feeling. Kaylin, when you blocked my path at the summit and said I was all you wanted, I meant that you were exactly the collaborator I'd been hoping to find, she said, though her eyes had shifted to that rose-amber color that suggested complexity beneath her words. Someone whose scientific vision aligned with mine, whose ethical framework I trusted, whose research could help save both our species. And now? Alex asked, because their 2 weeks of working together had created a dynamic that felt like more than professional collaboration, even before considering the intimate biological synchronization they were about to attempt. Now, Kaylin said, reaching out to touch his hand with fingers that felt like starlight given form, I've discovered that scientific compatibility isn't the only kind of resonance possible between our species. Alex felt the contact like a gentle electric current, warm and somehow familiar despite being completely alien. Kaylin. The synchronization process will allow the organisms to recognize our combined biological signatures, she continued, her touch becoming more firm. But it will also create a temporary empathic link between us. You'll be able to sense my emotions, and I'll be able to feel yours. That's... Alex paused, trying to find words for the mixture of scientific fascination and personal terror he was experiencing. That's a significant development in our working relationship. Yes, Kaylin agreed, her eyes now holding steady on that warm amber color. It is. Before Alex could respond, the facility's communication system activated with an urgent tone that made both of them step apart quickly. Your Highness, came the voice of Kaylin's chief security officer, we've intercepted communications indicating that the extremist faction has moved up their timeline. Intelligence suggests they plan to deploy bioweapons against human colonies within the next 4 weeks. Kaylin's skin immediately shifted to pale blue, and Alex felt her alarm like a physical sensation even without their biological link established. 4 weeks, she asked, her royal composure cracking slightly. Confirmed, Your Highness. The Council requests immediate status updates on your defensive research. Alex looked at the chamber of proto-organisms, then at Kaylin's face where worry and determination were creating patterns of color he was learning to read like emotional weather. We need to accelerate the synchronization process, she said, turning back to him with an expression that combined scientific urgency with something more personal. Alex, what we're about to attempt will create a connection between us that could last far beyond this project. What kind of connection? Alex asked, though he suspected the answer would involve yet another layer of complexity in what was already the most important and terrifying research of his life. The kind that might change both of us permanently, Kaylin said, moving toward the synchronization chamber. Are you ready to find out what that means? Alex looked at the glowing organisms that would soon be learning to recognize their combined biological patterns, at the woman whose scientific brilliance was matched by a growing personal connection he hadn't anticipated, and at the timeline that meant they had perhaps one chance to create defenses that could save millions of lives. Let's synchronize our biorhythms and save the galaxy, he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt about either prospect. The biological synchronization process, Alex discovered, was remarkably similar to meditation if meditation involved sharing consciousness with alien organisms while your biorhythms harmonized with those of a princess whose touch made you question everything you thought you knew about the boundaries between species. The proto-entities responded to their combined presence by creating patterns of light that seemed to dance between their joined hands, learning to recognize the unique signature of human and Veilthra cooperation. The organisms are establishing recognition protocols, Kaylin said softly, her voice carrying harmonics that Alex could feel as much as hear through their growing empathic connection. They're learning to identify threats to either of our genetic patterns as threats to both. Alex found himself experiencing Kaylin's emotions alongside his own. Her deep concern for her people's safety, her scientific excitement about their breakthrough, and underneath it all, a warm appreciation for him that had nothing to do with his research credentials and everything to do with the way he approached their collaboration with genuine respect for her expertise. "I can feel your thoughts," Alex said, marveling at the sensation of sharing consciousness with someone whose mind worked in patterns that were both alien and somehow familiar. Not specific thoughts, but the emotional context behind them. "Human neural patterns are more similar to ours than either species realized," Kaylin replied, and through their link Alex sensed her wonder at discovering how naturally their minds seemed to complement each other. "The organisms are using our connection as a template for the protective bonds they'll form with others." Their research breakthrough was interrupted by alarms that made the facility's living walls pulse with urgent red patterns. The communication system activated with Admiral Chen's voice, tight with controlled panic. "Dr. Parker, we have a situation. Long-range sensors are detecting biological weapons deployment in the outer colonies. The extremist faction has launched their attack 3 weeks ahead of schedule." Alex felt Kaylin's spike of alarm through their connection, followed immediately by fierce determination. "How much time do we have?" "The bioweapons will reach the inner colonies, including Earth and Valethra Prime, within 48 hours, Admiral Chen reported. Whatever defensive systems you've developed need to be deployed immediately." Kaylin was already moving toward the facility's deployment controls, her movements showing the kind of fluid efficiency that Alex had come to associate with her crisis management mode. "The organisms aren't fully mature," she said, her skin shifting to the pale blue that indicated high stress. "Deploying them now means using untested prototypes." "Untested prototypes are better than no defense at all," Alex said, following her to the control interface while maintaining their physical connection to keep the synchronization active. "What's the deployment process?" "We need to maintain our biological link while the organisms replicate and distribute themselves through both colonial networks," Kaylin explained, her fingers dancing across controls that responded to both her touch and her biometric signatures. "It will require us to serve as the primary template for recognition patterns across multiple star systems." Through their empathic connection, Alex felt the full scope of what she was proposing. They would essentially become the biological foundation for a defense network that spanned dozens of worlds, their combined genetic patterns serving as the template that would teach millions of organisms to distinguish between life to protect and threats to neutralize. "How long will the deployment take?" Alex asked, though he suspected the answer would involve yet another level of complexity. 6 hours of continuous synchronization while maintaining active connection to the deployment network, Kaylin said. "We'll need to remain in direct contact while the organisms establish protective colonies throughout both our territories." The facility's walls suddenly blazed with emergency lighting as new alarms sounded. "Your Highness," came the voice of her security chief, "we're detecting incoming threats to the research facility itself. The extremists have identified your location and are launching targeted bioweapons." Alex felt Kaylin's fear spike through their connection, but not for herself, for him, for their research, for the millions of people who would die if their defensive systems failed. "We deploy now," she said, activating the primary controls with decisive authority. "Alex, this will create a permanent biological bond between us. The connection we've established will become a lasting part of who we are." "Define permanent," Alex said, though he was already moving to maintain their synchronized contact as the deployment process began. "Our neural patterns will remain partially linked," Kaylin explained, her voice carrying both scientific precision and personal significance. "We'll be able to sense each other's emotions and well-being across any distance. It's how Valethra bonded pairs have functioned for millennia." Alex felt the truth of what she wasn't saying through their empathic link, that accepting permanent bonding was traditionally reserved for life partners, and that what they were about to do would essentially marry them according to Valethra biology regardless of their conscious choices about their relationship. "Kaylin," he said, maintaining their physical connection as organisms began streaming out of the facility toward deployment points across the galaxy, "are you asking me to bond with you permanently to save our species, or because you want to be bonded with me, Through their connection, he felt her answer before she spoke it, a mixture of necessity and desire, duty and genuine affection that made his chest tight with emotions that spanned multiple species worth of complexity. "Both," she said simply. "I need you to help save our people, and I want you to be part of my life beyond this crisis." The biological deployment process intensified, and Alex felt their organisms spreading across dozens of worlds, establishing protective networks that would shield human and Veilthra populations from the incoming bioweapons. But he also felt something else. His own consciousness expanding to encompass not just his individual awareness but a permanent connection to Kalen that felt like coming home to a place he'd never known he was looking for. "The bioweapons are being neutralized," came Admiral Chen's voice through the communication system. "Whatever you've deployed is working, the biological threats are being contained and eliminated before they can affect target populations." Through their bond, Alex felt Kalen's relief and triumph, but also her concern for what the permanent connection meant for his future. She was offering him a choice that would change everything about his life, not just his career, but his fundamental existence as an individual separate from the woman whose mind he was learning to know as well as his own. "Alex," she said, their biological synchronization creating patterns of light that danced around them like living aurora, "you could return to Earth after this crisis. The bond can be modified to allow you independence." "Could I?" Alex asked, feeling through their connection the depth of what that separation would cost both of them. "Would you want me to?" "I want you to choose what makes you happy," Kalen said, though her emotions revealed the hope she was trying to hide. "Whether that's returning to your old life or building something new here." Alex looked around the research facility where they'd created something unprecedented, not just biological defenses, but a partnership that transcended the boundaries between species. Through their bond, he could feel Kalen's absolute certainty that he belonged here, working alongside her to protect both their peoples and develop biotechnology that created rather than destroyed. "I choose the permanent bond," he said, feeling her joy bloom through their connection like sunrise. "I choose partnership with someone whose vision of protecting life matches mine. I choose building something together that neither of our species could achieve alone." The deployment process reached completion as their organisms established protective networks across 47 worlds, their combined genetic template serving as the foundation for biological shields that would guard against future threats. But beyond the successful defense deployment, Alex felt something more personal completing itself, a bond with Kalen that felt like the most natural development in the universe. "The Veilthra Council will need to formally approve our partnership," Kalen said, though their empathic connection carried her confidence that approval was merely a formality. "Will they mind that you've bonded with a human?" Alex asked. "They'll celebrate that their princess found someone whose dedication to protecting life equals her own," Kalen said, her skin shifting to the warm gold that indicated deep contentment. "Besides, you've just helped save 2 species. That gives you considerable political leverage." 6 months later, Alex stood before the joint session of the Veilthra Council and Human Colonial Congress, presenting their latest research on protective biotechnology while Kalen added insights that flowed seamlessly from their shared consciousness. Their biological bond allowed them to communicate without words, creating presentations that demonstrated the potential of interspecies cooperation at the most fundamental level. "The success of our biological defense network," Alex told the assembled representatives, "proves that different forms of life can work together to create protection rather than conflict." "Our ongoing research," Kalen continued, their bond allowing her to pick up his thoughts without pause, focuses on developing biotechnology that enhances life rather than controlling it. Through their connection, Alex felt her private amusement at how their professional partnership had become the foundation for something far more personal and complex. Their bond had evolved from crisis necessity to genuine love, proving that sometimes the most important discoveries happen not in laboratories but in the connections we make with those who challenge us to become more than we thought possible. As they concluded their presentation, Alex realized that Kalen's initial declaration, "You're all I want, human," had been both a professional necessity and a personal truth that had transformed them both. They had saved 2 species through biological cooperation, but more importantly, they had discovered that love could flourish across any distance, even the space between different worlds. Their permanent bond pulsed with shared contentment as they faced a future of unlimited research possibilities, protected populations, and the kind of partnership that proved the universe's greatest achievements came from cooperation rather than conquest.